USAID is doing what it can to support the Uyghur people, particularly those who are taking an activist role and those who have been oppressed by the country. Some of them have left the country, and USAID is taking efforts across China to ensure human rights programming where it can, but often outside the country.
I hope we can continue this conversation, particularly with the thought of how we can prevent the CCP from diverting or in some way frustrating those efforts. I'll look forward to having those conversations with you should you be confirmed.
I look forward to it.
With respect to Afghanistan, I see a very challenging role there because we're making commitments to continue U.S. aid, but the Taliban has taken over half of the districts there, putting our presence there under tremendous pressure. Have you had the opportunity to think about how you will deploy USAID resources under the current conditions in Afghanistan, particularly as you see them trending?
Thank you, Senator, for that question too. I have spent a bit of time in Afghanistan. I've been there maybe half a dozen times over the past 20 years and have seen some very good work that USAID has done there. And I recognize that the situation is very fragile right now and rapidly changing. I think USAID has made some strong gains in Afghanistan and will do what it can, both through our own efforts on the ground, but also working through partners there, local partners, international NGOs, and UN agencies to continue some of the good work that we have done. But if confirmed, I will certainly make Afghanistan a priority and to do contingency planning as the situation evolves.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to all of you on your nominations. Ms. Satterfield, if I could begin with you, and thank you for the work you've done at the Meridian House. Let me pick up on that work and something I heard you say, which is that you believe that educational and exchange programs do play an important role in our foreign policy. I agree with you. If you look at the previous administration, even before the pandemic hit, there was a big drop-off in the number of students coming to the United States. In the very first year of the previous administration, international student enrollment in U.S. universities declined by 6.6% in the first academic year. We don't need to go into all the reasons for that, but my question to you is it your goal to restore a more robust enrollment of foreign students in the United States and to reinvigorate our exchange programs?
Thank you, Senator, for that question and bringing up this incredibly important point. The United States remains the #1 destination for hosting international students, even though the numbers have dropped. Also, there's growing competition from other countries to recruit students to come there to study, and we cannot rest on our laurels. It is absolutely my intent to continue to find ways to message to international students. We need strong outreach with accurate and comprehensive information. Frankly, like the statement that was put out yesterday by the State Department, a joint statement by the State Department and the Department of Education, listing the ways that international students can come to the United States, to U.S. universities and colleges, and participate in a way. We can also network through Education USA, which is ECA's educational advising arm, and through our American Spaces, which are in over 600 places around the world. I absolutely commit, if confirmed, to making that a priority.
Well, terrific, because as you say, we have seen a drop-off in the number of enrollments even before the pandemic, and obviously we need to take into account health issues, but as you mentioned, we're seeing incredible competition around the world. Other countries see it as in their interest to attract students, and we have a whole lot to offer, and also a window into some of the values that form our country and foreign policy, freedom of speech and other things. So I really hope and I'm pleased that you're going to make that a priority. I also just want to mention to you that there's a very good exchange program with young African leaders, the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI, you're probably familiar with it. I chair the Africa Subcommittee here, and Senator Rounds is the ranking member, and we intend shortly to introduce legislation to codify that program. Congresswoman Bass has introduced and passed that on the House, and look forward to working with you. Hope I'll have your commitment to work with us on that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Ambassador Coleman, if I could, well, first let me start with Sudan. I had a chance to visit Sudan a little while back with Senator Coons, and as you know, the United States through AID has committed $700 million to support the transition from dictatorship to democracy. This committee is currently reviewing some of the rough drafts of the proposal. We need to get it done quickly, in my view. Are you familiar with that proposal, and do you commit to working with this committee to make sure that we implement it fully?
Thank you, Senator, for bringing up Sudan. It's one of the few bright spots, actually, on the horizon as it makes its transition from military rule to civilian governance. And if confirmed, I will absolutely make Sudan one of my priorities. I'm familiar with the legislation. I don't know the details of it, but I do understand that $700 million has been committed, and investments in helping the civilian government understand how to govern, and building institutional capacity and working with civil society so that they can strengthen that democratic governance process there is critically important. Thank you.
Thank you. And my last question relates to what Senator Haggerty brought up with respect to Afghanistan. I don't know if you've seen the movie Charlie Wilson's War, but for those of you who haven't, I recommend it to you. It's a story about a House member who was successful in getting all of his colleagues to support the purchase of Stinger missiles to provide to the Mujahideen, which did help drive the Soviets out of Afghanistan. But the very end of the movie is a scene of him asking his colleagues to support funding for education in schools in Afghanistan, and he was unsuccessful at doing that. We know what happened after the Soviet. We pushed the Soviets out, and we sort of, left the scene, and the Taliban filled the vacuum, and they of course gave sanctuary to Al Qaeda. So, two questions. One is, what is AID's vision for its continued participation in Afghanistan? Number two, how are you going to navigate the security situation there?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. USAID, I understand, is looking at the situation very closely in Afghanistan. And as I said earlier, doing contingency planning. It's almost impossible to know what will happen at this point and any time frame. But it has invested $22 billion in that country over the past 20 years and have some remarkable gains to show for it in terms of significant declines in maternal mortality, more girls in school than ever before in that country's history, and seeking ways to make sure that those gains are not lost, that in fact that they're sustained, whether it's through direct interventions or working through partners on the ground, through the multilateral system and the UN agencies. But also recognizing the possibility for refugee flows and being ready for that.
Well, I think we all have our hands full there with respect to what will unfold, but I appreciate your determination to stay engaged, security allowing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kane.
Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Haggerty, thank you, and congratulations to the panel. This is a very highly qualified panel. Ambassador Gifford, it's good to see you again, and I want to start with you. I would have asked exactly the question that Senator Haggerty did, looking at a background of a Rufus Gifford that I didn't know, and seeing so much political activity. I would have asked, can you, take an oath and be even-handed in your work? I've had the virtue of working with Rufus significantly in the past, and I couldn't see this about everybody I've worked with in a political capacity, but I can say it about Rufus Gifford, that he is going to be very, very even-handed in his approach to the job, which is what he did when he was ambassador to Denmark. Your success there was very, very notable. Let me ask you this, Ambassador Gifford. You talked about the many external-facing roles of the protocol chief, but there's also this internal-facing role. You talked about the management division within the office. In their past, there have been some controversies about internal management issues. Tell us what you would do, should you be confirmed, to foster a very professional and inclusive and even-handed environment in the office.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. And this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. I am certainly aware of the ongoing challenges. There are issues with morale, et cetera. And listen, I think that from a management standpoint, and I think this is the important thing to note here is that service overseas, understanding the culture of the State Department, understand the expertise that I am walking into if I am confirmed for this job is where you start, I think. General respect for the civil servants who've been doing this work for years, understanding that if I'm confirmed in this position, that I have a lot to learn still, that they're the career professionals, and I'm coming in to lead, of course, but I need to be building that team and fostering that sense of just that word, team. And I have to say that with the various teams that I've managed, roughly the same size, diverse staffs in a variety of different ways. I like to say that I at the beginning of any job like this, I take the bull by the horns and ensure that we change the tone and that we create an environment that is equitable, diverse, and empowering. Because honestly, if we're going to accomplish the mission, that's what we got to do. That's where we got to start.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Ms. Satterfield, your bureau is very important, and it's very important to Virginia because we have a significant number of people who work on programs. For example, in the Fulbright, we had 53 Virginians doing Fulbrights during 20 and 21 Peace Corps, 114 Virginians in the 2020 Peace Corps program. We've also hosted critical programs, including the Young African Leaders Conference that Senator Ben Holland asked you about at UVA in 2014 and Virginia Commonwealth University in 2016. So there's a lot I'd like you to ask, but I'm just going to ask you about this. Talk to us about the challenges of the Fulbright program during a time of COVID and how you intend to keep this program vibrant and active even as the State Department is issuing new guidance and other agencies are issuing new guidance every day about travel restrictions that may need to be continued with some of the nations where we have Fulbright scholars.
Thank you, Senator. It is important to continue to provide ways that we can connect with people around the world and Americans, particularly through Fulbright. It happens to be the 75th anniversary of that program this year, and it is a strong and vibrant way that we reach out to other communities across the world. I remember recently I was speaking with some college students and talking about the role, if I'm confirmed, that I'll play in the United States. And as soon as I mentioned Fulbright, their eyes lit up. It resonates, not only here in the United States, but in all places around the world. The pandemic has created a challenge for doing in-person programming, but I think that with a hope that we'll be able to continue in-person programs where possible, and continuing Fulbright and other public diplomacy programs will be critical. And if I'm confirmed, I'll look forward to determining ways we can do that safely.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to include Ambassador Coleman and Mr. Liu in a last comment or question. So, Mr. Liu, you're a wonderful public servant. Since you are nominated for a position that Ambassador Coleman has had, I hope you guys have lunch right after this and let her give you a lot of good advice about how to do it. Ambassador Coleman, here's something I'm just interested in. I just want to put it on your radar screen. There's a program at USAID called the New Partnerships Initiative, which is designed to invest in NGOs, small NGOs and local partners in the USAID humanitarian contracting space. There was a foreign policy article in May just recently that criticized USAID for distributing the NPI awards largely through large contractors, kind of undercutting the whole goal of the program, which is to focus on small contractors and local partners. Senators Rubio and I are going to introduce a bill this week called the New Partnerships Initiative Authorization Act, to really try to make sure that we are building capacity among creative, innovative, new partners, and not just legacy partners who do great work, but we want to create more innovation and more opportunity. And I hope that will be an area that you'll focus on should you be confirmed, and we look forward to working with you on that.
Ambassador Coleman, if I might start with a question in regards to how you intend to set priorities within USAID. And I mentioned this with President Biden making it clear that our foreign policy is going to be wrapped in our values, something that I think every member of this committee strongly supports. He's also indicated that corruption is a core national security concern. If you look at what the trends are around the world, decline of democratic states, a rise of corruption in many countries, including some of our allies, where we see a rise in corruption. Good governance and the role USAID plays in anti-corruption becomes critically important. Later this week, our committee will be considering legislation to expand our role and USAID's role in global health, something we desperately need to do. My question is, we have a limited amount of resources today under USAID that's devoted to good governance and anti-corruption. How do you intend to prioritize good governance and anti-corruption to protect and expand the capacity of USAID to deal with this critical issue for our country?
Thank you, Senator Cardin, for that terrific question. And also, let me just start by thanking you for your leadership on this issue, whether it's the Global Magnitsky Act or the Combating Global Corruption Act. You've truly shown tremendous leadership on bringing corruption to the forefront of what needs to be a whole-of-government approach to combating this scourge around the world, so thank you. If confirmed, I know that corruption and anti-corruption efforts will be very central to a whole range of efforts. Not only has President Biden made this one of his priorities, but Administrator Power has also created an anti-corruption task force and is really focused on this issue because it is such a challenging topic in so many parts of the world. And you know, if confirmed, I would really dig into the programs that exist, look at what has been effective, look at new areas that we could invest more in, but really make this something that's mainstreamed throughout all of our work that we're doing because it is so important.
I would just underscore that one of the areas that we really need to strengthen is the capacity of our embassies to deal with understanding the problems in their country and how we can best interact to deal with anti-corruption measures. So one of the areas that could help USAID, if there was stronger capacity within missions, to be able to provide that type of knowledge and help. I just urge you to make that part of your priority selections to strengthen the State Department's ability to deal with anti-corruption.
Thank you, Senator. If confirmed, I will absolutely work with my State Department colleagues on that.
Thank you. Mr. Liu, I want to talk about a serious issue we've had at the United Nations. We have UN peacekeepers. As part of the way that the administrative issues are handled, there are a lot of countries that lobby to become peacekeepers. And yet we've seen sexual exploitations too often in regards to peacekeepers. So I want to get your commitment and your response to how you will use your position at the United Nations to make sure that we protect the safety of the people on which the United Nations is operating with peacekeepers, and that safety will be the top concern, not just the politics of which countries are selected for peacekeeping.
Senator, thank you for that question. The United States has a zero tolerance policy when it comes to sexual exploitation and abuse. There have been improvements, I understand, in recent years under the Secretary General's leadership in terms of preventing sexual exploitation and abuse, increasing transparency of allegations, suspending troops engaged in wrongdoing, often repatriating them and sometimes even withholding payments. All of that being said, far more needs to be done, and the progress that has been made in recent years, including under Ambassador Coleman's leadership, happens when the U.S. is actively engaged in the United Nations. So you have my commitment, Senator, that if confirmed, this will be a top priority of mine, and I know it is of Ambassador Thomas Greenfield as well.
Thank you. Ambassador Gifford, I want to ask you about diplomatic immunity. It's something that's absolutely essential for diplomats to be able to carry out their responsibilities, that we know the pressure that develops, particularly when there's a particular incident. So how do you intend to provide guidance in regards to U.S. position globally on defending diplomatic immunity?
Well, I think, thank you for the question, Senator, and it is critically important. I think one of the roles of the Chief of Protocol here is understanding that when issues of diplomatic immunity arise, and they will inevitably arise, that we have to manage what could become significant frictions in a bilateral relationship. And how do you do that? This is so much for me about communication. That we are not policymakers, and the Chief of Protocol, if I'm confirmed. So what I think needs to be prioritized is heightened communication between whatever bureau, understanding the issue that has come up, and dealing with it collectively. And I think in an issue like this, involving incredibly sensitive issues, that's got to be prioritized above and beyond all else.
Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Ms. Satterfield, your position at the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs will allow you to establish import restrictions on cultural goods from foreign countries through the authorization of memorandums of understanding. Cultural property MOUs have the power to impact the cultural heritage of ethnic and religious minority populations, which the United States should aim to protect. If confirmed, will you urge the administration to appoint an advocate for religious and ethnic minorities as a public representative to the Cultural Property Advisory Committee to ensure that minority populations are properly represented?
Thank you, Senator. ECA is very proud of the work of the Cultural Heritage Center to protect and preserve global heritage. It is critically important work, as you've said. ECA can and should play a strong role, particularly in cooperating with law enforcement to prevent the financing of transnational terrorism through looting and trafficking of antiquities. If I'm confirmed, I look forward to working with Congress, other parts of the department, and private entities, particularly through the advisory committee, to ensure a diversity of perspective when continuing the important work as it was laid out originally by Congress.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Coleman, the United Nations Development Program and the World Health Organization recently reported that if low-income countries had similar COVID-19 vaccination rates as high-income countries, they could have added $38 billion to their collective GDPs in 2021. Through the G7, we have announced ambitious plans to share 1 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses with low-income countries. Global vaccine inequity still remains a very serious challenge. With the rise of the Delta variant, addressing the vaccine equity issues are more urgent than ever. If confirmed, will you commit to prioritizing the push for increased vaccine manufacturing and equitable vaccine distribution in your role at USAID?
Thank you, Senator. Absolutely. There's perhaps no greater challenge today than the global pandemic and its secondary effects and how it's ravaging countries around the world. And I'd like to thank this committee and Congress for its generosity on providing the 500 million vaccines and the $4 billion to Gavi. So it is incredibly important to get the rest of the world vaccinated, and I echo President Biden's comment to be that the United States should be the arsenal of vaccination, and I will do everything I can to make that happen.
Thank you. And Mr. Liu, climate change is an existential threat that continues to harm the quality of life for people all around the world. For that reason, our efforts to combat climate change must be closely aligned with efforts playing out in multilateral institutions like the United Nations. We also have to oversee any multilateral commitments to ensure they come to actionable fruition. How can we work to reform the UN system to ensure that climate commitments are monitored and measured so that they don't simply remain empty statements or words?
Senator, thank you for that question. I certainly share your concerns. The Biden administration believes that we can be most effective in multilateral organizations when we actively participate in them, and we have the greatest credibility in these organizations when we pay our dues in full and on time. So being an active player gives us that leverage. Climate change in particular is an important policy issue, as you well know, not only to the president, but to Ambassador Thomas Greenfield. This is an issue that she has raised in the UN Security Council, but it's frankly an issue that cuts across so many different parts of the multilateral system. So if confirmed this position, I will use my position in terms of managing programs to ensure that those that relate to climate change are effectively managed and well-funded.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Gifford, in your role, you're welcoming the rest of the world to the State Department, to the White House. We've gone through a turbulent time over a 4-year period, and now we're trying to restabilize all of our relationships. Could you just step back for a second and just lay out why you think that's important, that we respect each nation in the world and that we treat them in a way that ensures ultimately that we'll be able to elicit from them the kind of response that the United States is looking for on policy issues all across the spectrum?
Thank you, Senator. This is, again, something very near and dear to my heart. There are two words during the time that I've been preparing for this hearing and whatnot that keep coming up. And those two words are dignity and respect. And I pledge to you that when I think about this job, when I think about how we interact with world leaders and partner countries around the world, I will lead with dignity and respect. And I think that the soft power of diplomacy cannot be overstated. And as you mentioned, you're the first hand that folks shake when they're walking down their plane at Andrews or at Dulles or whatever it may be. And I think it was Senator Haggerty said in his introduction of me that that we create the environment conducive to diplomacy. And as far as I'm concerned, that is the way you create that environment in which diplomacy can thrive. You do that with dignity and respect.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank each and every one of you for your willingness to serve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Haggerty.
Thank you, Chairman Cardin. I wanted to just follow up with a few additional questions. You're very kind to let me do that. First, if I could turn to you, Ms. Satterfield, it's wonderful to see you here. In your opening testimony, you commented about the global competition for influence that we find ourselves in with authoritarian countries such as China and Russia. I'd like to compliment your department on the wonderful work that they've done with human exchanges, particularly the Fulbright program and other exchange programs that I've seen firsthand have an enormous impact. I'd also like to make a comment that there's an alumni network there that I see as immensely valuable, and I look forward to working with you to driving value from that alumni network, because I think it can make a real difference for the United States interest around the globe. Another thing you mentioned, and I compliment you for your operational experience, you talked about implementing standards and metrics to basically be a good steward of U.S. taxpayer dollars as you look at this program and take a data-driven approach to how you measure and evaluate what happens. Could you talk a bit about how you might use that approach to evaluate how we are doing versus China and Russia, two authoritarian countries that are trying to exert their influence, when you look at our programs relative to what they're doing?
Thank you, Senator. As it relates to measurement and evaluation, it's a critically important point, and one that the Bureau has been working very hard to come up with a way to have parity across the various programs. They're also different, and that's a good thing. We want a variety of opportunity, because what works in one community might not work in another, but that's proven to be challenging for M&E. And the Bureau has done a really wonderful job, in my opinion, based on the information that I've received in preparing for this hearing, to create a program that is a new framework that will allow ECA to have more data at its fingertips so that we can make good data-driven decisions, and that'll be rolled out bureau-wide at the end of next year.
As a business person, I've always focused on competition. I think we should acknowledge what our competition is and measure our performance according to that competition. So I encourage you to continue to proceed in that fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Mr. Liu, if I could turn to you for a moment. I'd like to talk with you about the Human Rights Council. The Biden administration has announced its intent to run for a seat on the council this fall. And Secretary of State Blinken has also acknowledged that the council is flawed, and he's promised to seek reform. In fact, in 2011, the Obama administration stated that the mandatory review of the council failed to yield even minimally positive results. So, Mr. Liu, if you're confirmed, I'd like to understand the type of reforms that you would like to seek as you look at improving the United Nations Human Rights Council.
Thank you, Senator Haggerty. I agree. The UN Human Rights Council is a flawed organization, but we also need to recognize the important work that it has done in terms of shining a spotlight on abuses in Syria, Iran, North Korea, its promotion of women, LGBTQ individuals. But it has a persistent anti-Israel bias based on a permanent agenda item at its meetings. The Biden administration believes, as I said to Senator Markey, that the best way to reform these organizations is by engaging with them, and that's what we intend to do. It is also a flawed organization because of the membership. We have some of the most egregious human rights abusers who are members of the Human Rights Council. When Ambassador Thomas Greenfield has addressed this issue, she said, yes, it is uncomfortable sitting side by side with these people, but it is as uncomfortable for them to be sitting next to us and for us to be calling them out. And I understand that the record has shown that when the U.S. actively engages in the Human Rights Council, that the number of anti-Israel resolutions decreases. But you're 100% right. This will be a challenge.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of our nominees today for their appearance. Thank you.
Let me again thank all of our witnesses nominees for your testimony today, and again your willingness to serve. The committee record will remain open through Thursday for questions for the record, and we would ask that you respond to those questions as promptly as possible.